I'm Hartwig Fischer, Director of the British Museum, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Era of Reclamation talk. I invited Bonnie Greer to curate a project, and together we identified reclamation as a prevalent theme of our era. This is also an opportunity to listen and to learn as we move towards the great transformation of the British Museum.
Your relation to the British Museum goes way back, and it's a fascinating relationship and a fascinating journey. I would like you to say a word about that. First encounter with the British Museum way back, and how then, what it felt like to come into this place.
Well, my late father, Ben Greer, was the son of a sharecropper. And he grew up in the 30s in rural Mississippi in the same town that Emmett Till was murdered in. He worked at night, and he used to get the Encyclopedia Britannica, and that was the way that he sort of learned about the world. And he would leave the encyclopedia, he slept during the day, and I would open it up. And in those days, and we're talking about the late 50s, the Encyclopedia Britannica was illustrated by objects in the British Museum. So I would be reading about the month of January and the whole myth about January and Janus, and then I would see an object from the British Museum. And I used to think, well, what is this place? And then when my father came here for the 50th anniversary of the D-Day landing, which was the last time I saw him well, we was too scared to come in here. We were scared. And I remember, I said to Daddy, I said, we're in London, we should go to the British Museum. And my father was like, oh, okay, well, what do we need to have some credentials or something? And I said, we probably do need some credentials to go in. And I remember we looked at the pictures of it, and we just thought it wasn't for us. But the time that my dad and I had the opportunity, Hartwig, we just were too scared. So anybody who tells me about reluctance to come in, I get it, because I felt the same.
But then you did enter the museum.
I did come in. Neil McGregor, at the beginning of the 2000s, asked me to come over for tea, and he said, would you like to be a trustee? I said, of what? He said, of the British Museum. I said, what? So I got to be on the board and became the deputy chair right when austerity was starting. So that was really very rough because all the cultural institutions were defunded. So it was a very rough time, but...
that was from 2005 to...
That was about 2005, yeah. It was, for me, I got to be in this museum, and I got to walk around and talk to the objects, and talk to the security guards, who were my favorites, and just, make my own connection with everything, which I think you have to do in a museum, otherwise you're just in a showroom.
You yourself, before 2020, embarked on a fascinating project in search of Black history, which is an extraordinary series of explorations of aspects of Black history. And I remember you came into the museum with your film team, and we were looking at one object in particular. We would also move elsewhere.
Yes. And
I had the chance to go along with you. And that was the Merrow head.
Yes.
The Merrow head is a head of Augustus, a bronze head, very well preserved. That was put up in the south of Egypt early on after the conquest of Egypt and its integration into the Roman Empire under Augustus. And that statue was pulled down by the Kushite
queen.
Nubian empire to the south of Egypt, who didn't appreciate that new presence of the Romans at the borders and didn't feel that there should be a statue of this guy who they didn't know anything about. So they took some hostages and they took the head along. The hostages, they had to negotiate with the Romans, they were freed. The head was buried under the threshold of their Temple of Victory.
And they stepped on the head.
In the royal city of Meroe.
Of Augustus.
Which it was, where it was found, around 1900, and then by British archaeologists, and it's come to the museum. And we were standing in front of this head, Bonnie, and you were looking at it, and you were starting to talk about it. And I, a museum person who wants to share what museum people consider knowledge, I said, hold it, you are projecting.
Yes, you did.
Didn't I?
You told me I was projecting, and I didn't hardly know you. And I'm like, whoa, I was. And I think that's what people do, and in a way, museums shouldn't stop the projection because that's the passageway.
Sometime later, Bonnie would come back to this moment, and I was mortified when I heard that. I thought, how could I have said something like this to you? So for me, revisiting that moment with you, Bonnie, was absolutely key in really rethinking the role of the museum as a place where this connection happens.
And it shouldn't be the intervener or interpreter of it. See that, there is of course the part of scholarship. There's a part of us keeping going. But I think sometimes what museums do is they intervene. And partly that's because people are educated to intervene. That's what they're educated to do. If you have a PhD or something in what you're gonna put it on a card and do that. And I think what people have always been about, but I think what we need to do now is to do less intervention. There should be information, minuscule, but less intervention in a way, and let people do the things that they need to do when they come into a museum. But first of all, I think what we try to do in this series is to ask, why do museums exist at all? What are they? And so one of the things that we were doing in the conversations was to do what an archaeologist would say, a deep dig into what does that mean right now in this city, particularly in this borough, particularly where people are trying to eat and heat their homes and all of that. What does it mean to have this institution now? And there isn't one answer, but the questions have to be put. And we have to keep exploring the answers to them.
And that was a bit the ambition that we had as we moved into this series of conversations. The institution itself has to reflect on its role in history.
Absolutely.
As you say, why does it exist? How did it come into being? How did it grow? What is the history of the global relations?
And you are dedicated to that within the scope and the shape and the remit of what you are here to do. That is what you are doing. That's how we were able to do this, because you were able to understand that you had to let these conversations happen. Otherwise, it was a chat show thing. I had people here that I didn't agree with them. That's the good stuff. That's what's good. Sometimes this museum is like a movie star who, everybody, you either hate her or you love her, and if you hate her, you hate her. And so these conversations, and when I'm thinking about why did we want to call it Era of Reclamation, it was to reclaim our human ability to be able to find a connection even when we think we can't. And that connection is about our need for meaning. Things have to mean something. That's how you stay alive. They have to mean something. Either you have babies, that the babies mean something, or you have God and God means something, or you have art and art means, but we are creatures of meaning. Things have to mean something. We can't function if stuff don't mean anything. And this museum, and I'm saying this because I love this museum since I was a little kid, this museum, and it's happening under you, and it's happening, in other places, has to constantly mean something.
And has to think about how it triggers that meaning.
Exactly. And not be scared. Not be scared when the thing happens.
And has to question itself.
All the time.
About its very fundaments.
All the time.
We talk about the Universal Museum, for instance. What
Whatever
is
that
universal?
is, yeah.
And who defines universality?
Thank you.
And what does it mean to people today? And what does it mean to whom? Where?
Exactly.
What does enlightenment mean today?
Exactly.
So we will, we make a lot of assumptions. We have a whole world of defining theories, if you like, that this institution tacitly is based on. And as we go through these passages of transformation, I think we need to question these fundaments.
Every step of the way, including the big questions that seem in people's minds to be settled, and are they? Are they?
But I would like to come back at the end of our conversation to that notion of cognition that is so vital for you. The moment of cognition, the moment where the encounter becomes an epiphany.
Yes.
You realize something
Yes.
without going into mysticism.
Yes.
But something really crucial happens.
Yes.
Something opens up.
Yes.
And that moment of cognition, for me, seems to be related to healing.
Yes.
Staying in the passage, showing the wound, addressing the wound. But in doing this, the passage takes you somewhere else.
Yes, Hartwig, because there's a point where the people on the slave boat knew they were never going back. They were not going back. There was no way back. All the people back home could do all the prayers on the shore that they wanted. They could do all the whatever. We weren't coming back. And we were looking at a ship that was going like this. People were jumping off of it. People were trying to kill themselves in other ways. And my ancestors and all your ancestors said, we're going to stay on this boat, and we're going to get off this boat somewhere, and then we're going to survive, we're going to thrive, we're going to stay alive. And that point of cognition is when every human being on that boat, individually and collectively, decided they were going to survive that boat. Wherever that thing was going to go, they were going to survive it. And that courage, genius, utter genius, and the knowledge that came from it is what I celebrate. What you celebrate, what the series celebrated, was that moment of cognition, which, if it wasn't for racism, segregation, and everything else, everybody could share in it, because we all need it. We all need to have that moment where the African brain actually changed the world, and changing the world, if they would just let us do it. If we would just be allowed to do it, we could do it.
And now you started to do it in here.
That's right, of all places.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Hartwig.
Bonnie Greer.